Hello everyone, welcome back. This is alrav from Quebec, Canada, the author and creator of Alcatraz the Protector / Alcatraz le Protector. And for today's video, I'll be talking about the best reference guide for comic book artists. So for anyone who are curious about what it takes to make a comic book, or for creators who are already in the domain, I'll be covering the best reference guide that I have in my possession to tell you about which one are the best that you need to have in order to create your own comic book or simply to enjoy. So let's get right into it. The first one I already talked about before in several of my videos, L'art de la BD tome 1 by Duck, published at les éditions Glénat, was not only my own comic book bible when it comes to storytelling, but it was also a catalog that served as a collection piece to get introduced to a wide variety of different authors and creators from a variety of different comic book types. And so the only downside with this one is that there is no, I'm not sure if there is any English translation of it. So for most people, they would go directly to this author guide that is known as Scott McCloud, the Invisible Art. So this particular guide is probably the most well known because it is considered to be the best guide for comic book storytelling, simply because it is based on it is an actual comic book that teaches you about how to create your own comic book. So there is a novel quality to it that you won't have any other place. And while I do think this is a good guide on its own right, I did read the French traduction a while ago, so I do remember that it was very interesting, very unique. I still think L'art de la BD is the most practical guide of the bunch because not only it gives you a nice variety of samples from many different series to showcase the different teachings, but it also has a no-nonsense approach to all the basics of comic book storytelling, from the different type of shots, the camera angles, and so on. So that's why I think this is the best one, but Scott McCloud is not a bad guide either. The second essential reference guide, in my opinion, would have to be the classic How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Here I'm showing you the French traduction version of the actual book. There is also the original VHS archives which you can watch online. So the French traduction is mostly the same as the English one, so that's why I'm showing you this to make this interesting. But it is an all-time classic. After showing a basic teachings such as the materials, the use of geometry and perspective, it goes straight into the superheroic art style that has most commonly defined superheroes from the big two such as DC and Marvel, and a lot of the reference courses that are shown here are still very relevant to these days. The only difference there are some portion of the books that are a bit dated and could have been updated in some instance. So for instance, I found the chapter about foreshortening and drawing the human head that could have used a few more clarifications in certain aspects. So this is why personally one of my personal favorite teaching course you can find online has to be the quote technique, which is so good that it kind of feels like it should be essential in every guide. And the same thing can be said for the Andrew Loomis approach when it comes to drawing the human head, which this particular guide is supposed to be based on, but I never really got a kick out of the examples that were shown in the drawing head section. But with that being said, despite that, it's still a great guide, and it teaches you the secret sauce to create stick figures, turn them into fully fleshed out characters, and drawing them in a very heroic style. So I would recommend this for anyone who's drawing realistic or semi-realistic action heroes or superheroes or anything of that sort. It is a timeless classic, and you do have a challenge of creating your own comic book page at the end of the book. I've never tried it myself, but I do make my own comic book now, so I suppose I did in a more indirect way. So it is there for anyone who are interested. It is an all-time classic, so I do recommend it on that basis alone. Now, the third and final reference guide I'll be showing here is how to draw the anatomy in comics, the reference manual. I do not know if there is an English traduction of that one that's available, but this is a more modern book, so I do believe that it should have somehow. So this particular guide is interesting because it is based by Christopher Hart and published at the Oswald edition. This particular book is a showcase piece of the anatomy under many different poses and circumstances. So for instance, if a character is laying down on his couch, it won't be the same as if your character is throwing a punch or something like that. So there are a lot of anatomy guides that are available out there, but this one is very handy for comic book creators because it is focused specifically on the anatomy in action, which is one of the most important aspects of any comic book, being able to draw the anatomy under all sorts of circumstances, which is exactly why this is the kind of book that every time you read, you learn something new, which is exactly why it's a really great guide to have. The one thing that can be said about the anatomy in general is that it's a lot like a perspective. It is important to learn it, but at the same time, it's the mindset that the artist has sometimes approach that's tend to be wrong, and it messes up with our ability to learn. So this is one of those instances where if you want to do the anatomy and the perspective in the right way, you should begin by, let's say, drawing your stick figure first in your pose, and then gradually fleshing out the perspective and correcting it as you go along, which is exactly why this is the perfect guide to have as a companion, so that way you can fix the anatomy as you go along rather than be a slave of the anatomy, which is sometimes a mistake that beginners will fall into. And this kind of philosophy is the same with the perspective. You want to start up with a good geometric foundation first before doing perspective, so it's the same for the approach of how to use and implement the anatomy in comic books. Of course, beyond these three guides, there are many different online references that are available out there, as well as many other books on the subject. So if you know any of them or think any that are worth sharing, please do so in the commentary section below. As always, the first issue of Alcatraz is available for free on my Substack. The links are available in the description below or on my channel's page. The same for the blog comics companion that comes with it. And the second issue is in the work as well and is expected coming out soon during the year, so stay tuned for that. With that being said, thanks for watching, and we'll see one another very soon. Enjoy the reading.